Celestial Golf is a game about orbital mechanics. You're going to be hitting your ball through the vast reaches of space, but at some point you're going to land on a planet like Mars. And I wanted to represent the terrain features of the planet in a fairly detailed way so that you can actually make out terrain features like the big craters and the mountains. It doesn't change the gameplay too much, but it is pretty fun to just bounce around, just sort of feel like you've arrived in a place as opposed to what you're doing for most of the game, which is just floating through space. So I really wanted it to feel like you can zoom all the way up and be present on a planet. To do that, I needed to get some fairly detailed terrain, and that's what today's video is going to be about, how I generated these rather beautiful planets that can be enjoyed from afar and also quite close up. The terrains are created in 3D in Blender, and we're using the real terrain data from NASA's orbiters, such as the Mars orbiter, and for each planet in the solar system, we're getting the appropriate data. So in this video, we're going to build Mars from scratch. Now, the first problem is finding the data. For each planet, we need the color data and also the topology so that we can generate those displacement effects. And I have found so far, I've done a bunch of these, that every one of these planets you find it in a different place and in a different format, and you have to figure out how to get it. So these are the two full color images of Mars that I have found. If we open up the full size images of these, I'll just compare them, right? This is the older one, it's sort of the more reddish one, and the newer one. But the newer one doesn't actually work that well, because if you have a look, it's got these like the lighting artifacts on the craters, for example. So that white is actually lighting. We don't want lighting because we're going to make our own lighting from the topography data. So this image is much better. Like it's much more neutral. It's really just capturing the color of the surface. I believe this has been color corrected, so the lighting artifacts have been removed. That's the sort of thing that we're looking for. And the other thing that's really important is that this is in an equirectangular projection. Most of them are, and that just means that the x coordinate is represents the longitude and the y coordinate represents latitude. And so you get this distortion around the poles. That's okay. It ends up looking fine when you wrap it onto a sphere. And then we need to find topography image. Now for Mars, the topography can be found on this page, which is the Washington University Geosciences. And this comes in extremely high quality. This is really, really good data. You can see that you can get it at anywhere from 4 pixels per degree to 128 pixels per degree, which is way more than we need it for our little game. So I'm generally looking for reasonably high quality, but not super high, because otherwise I can't even process it on my computer. So the 64 pixels per degree is pretty good for what I need it for. So you can see that it comes in a whole bunch of different images. What we're actually looking for is the MEGTs, which is the topography data. So these images come in as 4 separate files, which are the 4 quadrants of the equirectangular map. So I just manually stitch them together very, very carefully, placing them in the 4 quadrants. And you can see here, I have the full surface of Mars. I had to get them in the same place so it lines up with the color image. So here you can see there's the color and there is the topography. Here we have the Olympus Mons, the tallest mountain in the solar system, and the 3 Tharsis mountains. And you can see them much more clearly, the mountains much more clearly in the topography, because white represents very high elevation and the darker represents very low elevation. So once we are reasonably confident that these 2 images line up perfectly, we can start bringing them into Blender. Okay, so we're in Blender, we have a brand new file, and I'm going to go through the process of creating Mars. This isn't going to be a complete detailed step-by-step guide. It's just too many steps for me to do that. It's just going to give you a general overview of the process. So like every Blender tutorial, we're going to start by selecting everything and deleting it. And we're going to start with adding a sphere. Now, you can add a UV sphere or an icosphere. I don't think it really makes much of a difference, but an icosphere sort of distributes the triangles a bit more evenly around. I'm going to increase the subdivisions. I don't think this really matters in the end, but we'll just go up to 4 so it looks kind of round, and that's going to be our planet. in materials, we're going to create a new one, call it Mars, and we'll go into the shading viewport. So here we have the 3 files. I'm not going to use this one. I'm going to bring in these 2 and just drag them in as nodes. So like I said before, this is the color one over here. So I'm going to rename these to topology and color. If we just put the color output straight into the BSDF, the final material, you can see we've sort of got Mars, but it isn't mapped onto the correct spot on the sphere at all. But the easiest thing to do is to just go into UV maps and delete the UV map. We're not going to use that. Instead, back in shading, you can see we've lost the surface. We're going to add a texture coordinates node. And instead of using UV, which is our non-existent UV coordinates, we're going to use generated and put it straight into the vector. And there you can see that's a bit of a problem. But then if we change this from flat to sphere, we're going to magically get the color of Mars wrapped onto this UV sphere. It looks like a nice little wooden marble thing. You can see the flat shading. Let's change that into smooth shade so we have a nice round planet now. And there with the color. It's a bit shiny, but we'll deal with that. And now we're going to get the topology data on there. We are going to create a new node called displacement. We could be creating just bumps. If you wanted to make a more realistic looking planet that you're only going to look at from afar, you really just want bump data. But we actually want the mountains to physically pop out of the planet. So we need a displacement. So we're going to put that there. And we're going to run the color of the topology, which is not really color, it's really the height data, into the height of the displacement. And we're going to plug the displacement data into the displacement output. Okay, so we have our topology. Nothing is really popping out yet. If we change the scale, you can see there, you can see it starts to really grow those mountains out. But it's fake. And you can tell that it's fake because it looks like it's popping out when we do this. But if we zoom up close, you can see these are barely making a change to the surface. You need to go into the material settings, and here displacement is set to the default of bump only. So that's why we're seeing it looks like it's really sticking out, but it's just a lighting trick. If we change that to displacement and bump, you can see that it's really sticking out of the planet now. It's kind of looking at almost comically large. Whoa, there's Olympus Mons. So that's what Mars looks like when we exaggerate the terrain surfaces. It looks so good. But we don't want to be that exaggerated, so we'll go in and change this scale factor down a little bit, and you can kind of, just for the purpose of what we actually want. If we go to the top view and have a look, I'm going to manually change this for each surface just to get something that looks kind of interesting. So if we imagine playing the game and having the ball bouncing around on the planet here, we want the mountains to be about this height. We don't want them to be too flat. So, like, this is probably more realistic, or even less than that is probably more realistic. But I want it to be something a little more interesting so that when you're playing the game, you actually feel like there are real mountains here. And one thing to note is that the game is played entirely on the equator, right? The ball only ever bounces around the equator of these planets, which means that you only get to bounce on equatorial mountains, right? But when we scale things up just a little bit more, a mountain like Olympus Mons actually sticks out past the equator point, and that will be picked up in the game as a surface that the ball can bounce on. So it's a little bit of a fakery. You can see if I rotate the camera, it's not on the equator line. It's still fun to have it sticking out. So that's what we do. And there you have basically the shape of Mars, and you can see here, this is our shader material. We can play with the roughness. It's very rough, so make the terrain less shiny. We're mostly done with making the planet. But now we have to get it into the game. So just jumping over into Godot quickly, and you can see here is Mars loaded up into the game. You can rotate the sun, and you can actually see the terrain details being lit up from different angles. So this is really cool. I love the effect of this from just a 2D rendering, right? This is a two-dimensional game. We're not bringing the Mars 3D model into Godot, we're rendering it in Blender, and yet we can have this beautiful shading. We can have the sun changing its angle over the course of the day, which is not something we can really get away with without having, because it's a game about simulating the solar system. And the way it works is that we render two images for each body. We render, this is the color image. You can see it's got the displacement map is applied, there's all the bumps, but the coloring is really flat. There's actually no lighting on this image at all, even though it was rendered out of Blender. And then we have this normal map. So this is a false color image, which was also rendered out of Blender, and it shows the display. It's sort of showing the displacement on the surface, although not in the same way as our displacement map, which was a grayscale image showing the height. This image shows the angle of every single point on the surface, which way it is facing outwards. So just as an example, this is what a normal map looks like of a perfect sphere. So what you're seeing is every point on the sphere is facing in a certain direction. And the color of this image isn't really representing color, it's representing a vector. So the green means that it's pointing straight up. Red means that it's pointing 120 degrees off, so into the lower right, and blue means that it's pointing 240 degrees, so into the lower left. So every single point, there's a smooth gradient of colors as we go around the sphere. So this is going to tell essentially a two-dimensional lighting model. When light hits the surface, which way should the light bounce? So it's kind of halfway between 2D and 3D. And if we were to render this perfect sphere in Godot, we would have the planet be perfectly round. Now, if we go into the Mars normal map, you can see that it's almost the same as the sphere. It's still got the green at the top, the red at 120 degrees, and the blue at 240 degrees. But it's got all of these little perturbations which change the shape of the surface. So it changes the way that the light is going to bounce off the surface. So as an example here, you can see on these craters, like this top section of the planet is mostly green, right? But you can see that when a crater on the edge of the crater that's facing to the lower right, it's red, and when it's the part of the crater that's facing towards the lower left is blue. So that means that when the light hits those particular pixels of the planet, it's going to bounce in a different direction. So that's how we're going to get our nice dynamic lighting in the 2D game engine. So let's set up Blender to render these images. So we're going to add a camera, set it to a top view. We're going to change our render resolution to 2048 by 2048, so a nice high resolution image that we're going to get out of this, and set the camera to orthographic so that it's straight on. We don't want to have any perspective in this shot, and we'll just pull it out until we just get a little bit more of the planet, and now we can render that image. Okay, my computer crashed. There is one really important setting that you need to change if you're going to do this, and that is in the render settings, subdivision dicing rate render needs to be bumped up from 1 pixel to 4 pixels. Otherwise, it's just going to subdivide way too much. So that should solve it. Let's render again. But the other thing that I forgot to do is fix the lighting. So if you switch into the render tab, you can see there is basically no lighting other than a small amount of ambient light. We don't want to render with lighting. We don't want to, we could add a light. We could add a sun and turn up its brightness if we wanted to do like a nice render here. And you can see that we have a fairly realistic lighting model that the Blender is providing us. But again, we're trying to make that very flat shaded 2D image and have Godot do the lighting in real time. So instead of doing a light, we're going to go back into shading, and we're going to take this color part of the image, and instead of putting it into base color, which is basically setting it as the color of the surface that's waiting to receive light, we're going to drop that. We're going to set it instead straight into the emission color. And then we're going to turn emission strength up to 1. And now we have Blender is not lighting it at all. It's just setting the color of each pixel in the output to the color of the input pixel. So it looks very, very flat shaded. Let's finally render this image now. Okay, and it's done. On my GPU, this whole image took about 30 seconds. So to set up the normal map, there are a bunch of different ways that you can do it in Blender, and only one of them works. So here's what I do. If you go to the compositing tab, you can have full control over how those pixels post-rendering get into the file system. You can see it's already set up to take the color image that we're rendering and put it into the viewer that we can then right-click Save As. But what I really want to do is have that automatically go into a file. So I'm going to set File Output Node. I'm going to drag that image straight into there. Okay, and now to tell it to render the normal map, we're going to go into View Layer, and we're going to tell it to not only create a combined, which is the final color image, we're going to set normal here. So that means that when we click render, it's going to also render the normal map, which is going to be added as a new node here. And then we can add that to a new file output. And if we put the normal into that image and we hit render, we're going to get both images saved automatically. Okay, now that's rendered again, and we can switch in here to view the normal map, but you can see there is something wrong with it versus what I showed you before. The reason is that Blender's normal vectors have both positive and negative components, and the problem is that the positive components get turned into that color range, but the negative values, they just go black. What we need is for negative values to go into the lower half of the range and positive values to go into the upper half of the range. So to do that, let's just click on the normal. So we're going to add a vector math node. We're going to change this to a multiply add, and then we're going to set all of these values to 0.5. Now, a couple of other things. We need to get the alpha. We can see around here it's gray, so we're just going to add a set alpha node to set the alpha value of the image to the alpha value of our color render. That's what that's going to look like. And if we have a look at the actual file that was rendered, you can see that it matches what I had before. So there we have our beautiful normal map. So back over in Godot, let's bring it into the game. If we just drag the Mars PNG and scale it down, you can see we've got our Mars image in the game, but that's just our color image. To get a normal map, we're actually going to change this texture to a canvas texture, which has the diffuse image, that's the image we had before, and a normal map. So we'll bring our normal map in, and you can see the normal map didn't do anything because we don't have any lighting. So if we bring a light in, we'll get a directional light for the sun. And now you can see that right away, if we rotate that light, we have the bumps of the surface are being properly reflected by the Godot engine. So that is how we basically get a low detail planet into the game. You can see that it's actually very low detail. That's the highest quality that we can get from this image. It's only 2000 pixels wide. So in order to get the detailed view that you see in the game, we actually need to go and render at a much higher resolution, which has a few more tricks. So in the next video, I'll talk about how we get these much higher detail images into the game, how we do collision detection and the atmosphere shader to make it basically pull off this trick of being able to zoom all the way from the whole planet view, or indeed the whole solar system, all the way up to the details on the surface, including that feeling that morning is coming and it's daytime and we're actually on this planet. So I hope you'll join me for that one, and I really hope you enjoyed this video looking at how we construct a planet in 2D but with realistic lighting using Blender. So as always, Celestial Golf is available on Steam to wishlist. I hope that you'll join me on this journey to create this game about space exploration, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.